Welcome again to Daily Devotion. We're concentrated on the foundational bedrock truths that make up the Christian worldview that's necessary in order to have a strong faith. Today's focus is God is omniscient, all knowing, and we're going to talk about what that knowledge is about. Our focus is on the infinity, the boundless knowledge of God. And this includes both his knowledge, his wisdom, and a grasp of all things past, present, and future. Him knowing the future is vitally important for you to understand. Humanly speaking, we could compare knowledge to our own world. We think of it like, hey, Google, because we want to ask questions of someone who knows more than us to get the answers that we need in order to make decisions that we need to make. So we understand the importance of knowledge, and we understand the universality of it in the on the internet. For us, this is one of the main places that we go in order to get our worldly knowledge or our information that has accumulated over time. We are in the infant stage of our own technology today. But look at how impressive it actually is. We are all taking we are taking all of what we know, all of the history of the past, and digitizing it for the benefit of the future. Do you think God's impressed with all this Hey Google stuff and what's on the internet? Do you think that makes him think, whoa, look at what man is doing? If this trend continues, and it's funny because it's just since 1982, I remember when computers first came into my life, and they had just basically gone to the shelves in the 80s with personal computers. And it has been such a short journey, actually. But what if this continues over the next 1,000 years? How do you think that might compare to what God knows? Is technology going to get us to the point to where we're like God in that sense? Google knows its stuff because it has people putting in history. They're putting in their own learning and their own experiences, and they're keeping it where all of us can get to it. But they are doing so in an effort to simply accumulate the knowledge of history, or the knowledge that has come to us over history or over time. But God, where does he get his knowledge? Does he get it from history, or does he just have it? Well, the truth is, he just knows. We used to pray for God to share with us his wisdom. Now we just say, hey, Google, hey, Siri, and we ask the questions. But it is very important for us in our foundational stuff to get this locked in about God. Our scripture for today is Isaiah 40:13-14 out of the New Living Translation. Who is able to advise the Spirit of the Lord? Who knows enough to give him advice or teach him? Has the Lord ever needed anyone's advice? Does he need instruction about what is good? Did someone teach him what is right or show him the path of justice? Now, that is all a resounding no to the answer of that question, because God does not need to be taught, and nobody can tell him what he doesn't already know. And the other scripture verses that I want to read are Job 38:2-7. Who is this that questions? By the way, this is God speaking to Job out of a whirlwind, a tornado. Who is this that questions my wisdom with such ignorant words? Brace yourself like a man, because I have some questions for you, and you must answer them. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you know so much. Who determined its dimensions and stretched out the surveying line? What supports its foundations, and who laid its cornerstone? As the morning stars sang together and all the angels shouted for joy. You see, God is the one who really knows. Omniscience, according to Google, I thought that would be a funny place to look for this. Here's what it says: knowing everything. That's what omniscience is. It's a biblical term, or actually a biblical scholar term, a theological term. And it means knowing everything. According to Google, it means all knowing, all wise, and all seeing. One Bible scholar says the unique quality of God's knowledge is its totality of perfection. It not only applies to God's knowledge in general, but also to his knowledge of us. He knows us completely. Everything we've been, everything we are, and everything we will ever be. That should make us shudder, actually. God does not learn. God's knowledge extends even to our thoughts. He can read our minds. He knows our mind before we act or speak. See Isaiah 66:18. He even knows the intent of our heart as we approach action. If you look in Genesis, at Genesis chapter 4, you can see God's interaction with Cain. He knew Cain was a murderer and that he was going to kill his brother before he did it. If you also want to see the substantiation of this, look at Hebrews 4:12 and Psalms 139, 1-4. If there were knowledge that God didn't possess, he couldn't possibly hold the title as God. For there would be knowledge outside of himself, and that would indicate weakness and a sort of individualism, which would suggest more than one God. It also is important to note that when we talk about God being omnipresent, that he is everywhere at the same time. When we talk about that subject, then you'll see that God could not possibly have knowledge outside of himself, since he everything that is within God. Another scholar says to acknowledge God's perfect knowledge is unsettling, because this means that God knows us completely. He knows the nitty gritty. We don't want to we don't want some things about ourselves to become known. We hide it even from ourselves. A.W. Tozer said, "We have all rebelled against God and thus fear exposure." And another scholar says there is a fear of being beneath the gaze of someone else. We don't mind staring at others, but the moment that we come under the glare of someone else staring at us, we are immediately self-conscious, embarrassed, confused, fearful, and it alters our behavior. We hate the experience and we do everything necessary to avoid it. And if we can't avoid it, it becomes intolerable. Our discomfort with this knowledge about God should only continue if we are not truly believers. For the believer, this news is not all bad. It's actually very great. Here are 3 reasons that you can rejoice that God knows everything about you. Number 1, since he knows all things, he knows the worst about you, and yet he loves you and he saved you. Number 2, he knows the best things about you, even though some people have not recognized your good things that you do. And number 3, God knows what he is going to be able to create in you, or create you to be, through the refining process, and he rejoices in his work to do his work in you. God's omniscience also means through foreknowledge. He knows all things into the future. He is outside of time and knows the end from the beginning. Isaiah 46:10, New Living Translation. Only God speaks. Only I can tell you the future before it happens, before it even happens. Everything I plan will come to pass, for I do whatever I wish. You and I need to rejoice in knowing that God knows the future and he sees you in it in a very positive and perfect role. I want to close with one reading from another scholar. Here's what he says. Thomas Watson. It is impossible to overstate the qualities of God's knowledge, Watson observes. Years ago, God's knowledge is primary. Watson said this years ago. God's knowledge is primary, for he is the pattern and source of all knowledge, from which others merely borrow. His knowledge is pure, for it is not contaminated by either the object or its sin. His knowledge is facile, for it is without any difficulty. It is infallible. It is instantaneous. It is entirely retentive. God is perfect in his knowledge. I hope this has helped you today. I pray that you will lock this in as a foundational belief in your Christian worldview. Have a great day.